Good afternoon, and we are going to do a few more book reviews. Today is Saturday, December 8th, 2018 on the Gregorian calendar. We have a lot of books to get through because it's been a while since we've done a video. So we're not going to go in any particular order. Well, actually, this is size order, so we're going to do that. The first book is called The Moon is Down. It's by John Steinbeck. It's fiction. It was recommended to me by my friend Joe Tonin, who said he just reread it, and it sounded interesting. It's about a small town, it's probably in Belgium or something like that, that is getting invaded by the Nazis during World War II, and the town resists. And it was interesting in given our situation where we are now having to resist fascism as it takes over our government in a very more clear and defined way than previously. So yeah, it's a well put together narrative, very short. This book is called You Have the Right to Remain Fat by Virgie Tovar. This book was she's very clear in naming fat phobia as a form of bigotry. She's a very witty and analytic writer. So it's a very quick read. And when she said one thing that really, I think, hits home or rings true for me is the thing about health. People always say, oh, but it's not healthy to be overweight or whatever. She talks about how it's unhealthy to be rejected by society, and that causes depression and all kind of anxiety and horrible mental health problems. So this is a really good book for feminists to read. Or other people, even if they're not feminists. This book is called Basi and Company by Saro-Wiwa. For some reason, I was looking into Saro-Wiwa, and I found out that he had written this book. He also was the screenwriter behind the main screenwriter behind the show. So it was also a show on TV in Nigeria, and it's very funny because. It reads like a TV show. There's, those like sound bites, those one-liners, a lot of those, and it just really makes fun of that mentality in Lagos and everywhere, getting rich quick, and how it's all about money and becoming a millionaire and looking good, and so he's very satirical, and the Saro-Wiwa, his story is very interesting too. I really only knew him as an activist defending Ogoni land from oil exploitation and how he was killed by the government. And I knew he was a poet because I have one of his books of poetry, but I had no idea he had done TV writing. I thought this book was hilarious. This book is called Antifa, the Anti-Fascist Handbook. Also read because of the times. I think the author Mark Bray, a lot of the arguments tend towards some of those same arguments that you read a lot of other white anarchist authors making about violence, basically like justifying the political use of violence. So that was a little bit, stuff I have seen before. But what's new and unique about this is the interviews that it's based on with anti-fascist activists in Europe and North America, and it's it's written right now, so it just came out last year, I think. So it's up to date. It's a good book. I recommend it. We also read. This is one that my partner and I read together. It's called El Viejo y el Mar. This is the Spanish translation of the Ernest Hemingway book in English, The Old Man of the Sea. I had read this one many years ago in English, but my sister picked this up for me when she went to the Ernest Hemingway Museum. I think the one in Florida. Yeah, Key West. And so I decided to read it in Spanish, and it was I remembered a lot of the story. This was good to learn fishing related and sailing related vocabulary in Spanish. A lot of stuff I didn't know. Um, but yeah, it's very, it comes across, the translation is very good. It comes across pretty much the same as this one did. And what can I say? It's Ernest Hemingway. I also read this book called Merle, Haggard, the Running Kind. It's not a biography so much as like a songography. It's about his songs and the progression of his songs over his career. Provided a lot of insight into his life and Merle Haggard's life and songwriting. You see a lot of themes repeated. Some that the author ties very closely to an American identity. Good thing is that he's not just about country music. He's also able to relate Merle Haggard's work to Marvin Gaye's, for example, or other people that were recording at that time. So yeah, this one was a really good one. Merle Haggard, The Running Kind. Part of my reading about country music. This book is called Where the Island Sleeps Like a Wing. It's a book of poetry by Nancy Morejón, who's a Cuban poet, and it's also translated, so it's got Spanish on one side and English on the other side. And the translations were actually really interesting. I read this in Cuba. They're not literal, but it's not word for word translation, but it does a really good job of communicating the feeling of what Nancy Morejón was writing about. She's a revolutionary. She writes about her family, and there was one poem in here that I read out loud. It was dedicated to Angela Davis about Oakland. It's interesting. It's a good book of poetry. Where the Island Sleeps Like a Wing by Nancy Morejón. This book is called Hillbilly Nationalists, Urban Race Rebels, and Black Power. And this one is pretty recently published also. And I really enjoyed this book. And I'm really recommending people read it, especially white people or folks who are studying the movements of the 60s and 70s. I was trying to research basically the folks in the white movement from that time period, SDS and the Weather Underground, and that's why I read that book about Sam Melville. And most of those books are just so, just so dissatisfying. And I think it's because those groups and those movements at that time were so disconnected from reality in a lot of ways. But this one was much different. This is, I think I liked it better because I liked the groups better. They were working on organizing white folks, especially poor and working class white folks, so they have a class analysis. And they're also anti-racist, so that's very important, obviously. It just offers a different example of of community organizing, but also revolutionary organizing that people were doing at that time. That wasn't necessarily, it was still radical without, doing any bombings or anything like that. Like the Weather Underground, was really famous for doing. But yeah, I really recommend this one, Hillbilly Nationalists. This is a biography of Ruth Brown. It's called Miss Rhythm. Autobiography of Ruth Brown. She wrote this book, and I really was not that familiar with Ms. Ruth Brown or her career before I read this book, but now I have a much deeper appreciation for her and her work. She was one of the pioneers of R&B, and I think she was on Columbia. Oh, Atlantic. Atlantic, because she had this huge battle with Atlantic record company that they were exploiting their talent. And underpaying them and everything. So she was one of the people that helped make sure that artists like her, who were pioneers of rock and roll, ended up getting paid. And it helped establish the Rhythm and Blues Foundation. So it's a very interesting story. It's from the old days, and it really gives you a glimpse of that time also, that time period. And I guess the last one for today is Aretha's autobiography, which I had just finished this right before she passed. But kind of in some ways reminded me of Celia Cruz's autobiography, but I like this one a lot better. I think she's not as candid as I might have hoped somebody to be in their autobiography, which is I think why the guy that wrote this with her, David Ritz, wrote another book about her afterwards. I think that one was unauthorized, to tell I think more of the story, part of the story that she didn't tell. I think she's candid, and when she talks about her like desire for men and stuff like that in her life, and some of the problems that she had. But like when it comes to her family, that's really where she doesn't say much. She kind of alludes to some things about her dad and her sister Carolyn, but never really coming out right and saying it. And maybe that's just her way of being respectful to them. But it kind of leaves you with the feeling that she's leaving out some really important parts of the story. So yeah, I really like this book, and it was well timed, I guess, in terms of reading it right when everybody was really getting interested in Aretha because of her passing. A very interesting book, this one too. So that's what we have today. Thank you everybody for watching. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to make them, or even any suggestions. Sometimes I do take suggestions, like I did from Joe. And that's it for today. Thank you.